There's an overwhelming consensus of scholars across different ideological backgrounds that affirm Jesus as a very real historical figure, based on an abundance of evidence. So before we look at some of that evidence and start building your case, I want to show you some quotes from 5 well-respected agnostic or non-religious scholars on the subject. Bart Ehrman is a professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He's a leading New Testament historian and a popular critic of Christianity. In one of his books, he writes, "This view, meaning Jesus mythicism, is not accepted even among non-believing scholars such as agnostics and atheists. Jesus' existence is virtually incontrovertible." In a later book, he writes, "Whether we like it or not, Jesus certainly existed. He's attested in multiple sources, some of them non-Christian, and our most reliable accounts are based on eyewitness testimony." Lawrence Mikotic is a researcher and professor of library sciences at Purdue University. And in an article for Biblical Archaeology Review, he wrote, "Anyone who dabbles in the discipline of history commits blatant fallacies if he or she tries to ignore the person of Jesus when studying first century Palestine. For Jesus, both kinds or categories of evidence, meaning biblical and extra-biblical, fulfill the historical reliability criterion of independent attestation abundantly. They come from diverse, mutually independent sources, Jewish, Greek, and Roman, confirming essential claims about him. These independent witnesses render arbitrary and false claims that Jesus never lived. He is abundantly verified to have existed." Gerd Ludemann was one of the leading German critical scholars of Christian origins. He taught Jewish Christianity and Gnosticism at McMaster University and New Testament at Vanderbilt Divinity School. In one of his books, he wrote, "I count myself among those New Testament scholars who argue for the historical existence of Jesus. The theory that he never lived, that he was invented, is for me not an option. If we apply analogous cases, the explanation that most commends itself is that Jesus really did exist." Maurice Casey was a British New Testament scholar and expert in Aramaic sources, and he was emeritus professor at the University of Nottingham. He wrote, "I've refuted the arguments to show that this theory, Jesus mythicism, is far from perfect, and I think I've definitely shown it doesn't stand up. I've tried to show a general audience that the existence of Jesus is effectively beyond doubt." And finally, we have a quote from Larry Hurtado, who is emeritus professor of New Testament language and literature at the University of Edinburgh. And he wrote in one of his blogs, "Some mythicists argue that Jesus was invented by the early Christians in the same way that adherents of some conspiracy theories argue that the account of what happened is a lie, imposed in some way on all of us. I believe it's best to think of mythicists in precisely the same terms as we think of Holocaust deniers and flat earthers. Like them, mythicists are not really interested in what actually happened. This is why arguing with them is so trying. As John Dixon put it, debating a mythicist is like rustling smoke." So these are just a few of the more prominent voices from the overwhelming consensus within modern scholarship that argues for the historicity of Jesus. These 5 men have spent decades and decades, over a century combined, researching into the evidence surrounding Jesus to come to these conclusions. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that clip. If you want to see the full video where that segment came from, you can click the thumbnail up in this corner. And if you want to see more apologetics content where I take a close look at these tough questions and misconceptions that people have about God and the Bible, you can subscribe by clicking the button down here.